Hi, lovely to see you all. It's great to be here. And a huge honour for me to take the spot. So I'm really excited to talk to you about DevOps. We are at the DevOps conference after all, but specifically why it is catalysing a renaissance in this thing we call value stream management. So my name is Helen. I have what I'm told is a portfolio career, which basically means I've got a bunch of different jobs and work for a bunch of different people. I head up the Value Stream Management Consortium, which is a not-for-profit, intended to create space for people that are interested about value stream management to come together and learn from each other. I've got a bunch of case stories that I'll share with you today. I've also worked with the DevOps Institute for many years now, in fact, since their inception. They were acquired about 18 months ago by a company called PeopleCert, who also had acquired Axelos, who own ITIL, and also Prince2. So quite a nice spread in that organisation now between DevOps and ITSM and project management. I found the project management hard because I'm a DevOps person, so I kind of believe in the project to product movement. But I'm learning that a lot of people use project management, and we'll probably touch on a couple of moments about that today as well. Prior to this kind of strange, I guess, nearly 5 years of portfolio career, I was doing about a decade of DevOps consultancy, starting in release management and then moving into a broader kind of helping people on their DevOps journeys or their DevOps transformations, working in the UK. You've probably gathered that I'm British, working in the UK with people like Lloyds Banking Group, Vanquis Bank, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, which is a rather wonderful charity we have in the UK, Hiscox, a whole bunch of different organisations, mainly in financial services and insurance, also some German companies like Deutsche Telekom, and also some Middle Eastern companies like Elm, who basically run the tech systems in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So met quite a few different people, helped quite a few people with their DevOps implementations, and this is what led me down the VSM path, and I'll explain more as we go along. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, kind of a state of, if you like, where we're at today in terms of DevOps. Talk about your value streams, because you might not think now that you've got any, but I'm pretty sure you do. We'll align value streams to DevOps toolchains and talk about what a value stream network is and what that might look like for you, and then perhaps what you could do next. So first of all, let's talk about where we're at with DevOps. It's been a while now, hasn't it, since 2009, that first event in Ghent with Patrick Dubois, the godfather of DevOps, as I like to call him. This is actually this chart here that you're seeing. This from the State of DevOps report from Puppet in 2021. And it really struck me when I saw this, having followed this report since its inception. This news here, what you're seeing is this blue band is saying that this large swathe of companies is finding it really hard to move up into the higher mid-tier, the higher levels of capabilities. So I'm sure you're all familiar with DORA metrics. Who uses DORA metrics? Or let's do who's heard of DORA metrics first. Hands up. Yeah, and who uses DORA metrics? Interesting. So a very small fraction of those that have heard of them. My experiences with DORA goes quite a way back, because I used the DORA assessment alongside another assessment that we'd created ourselves with these companies that I spoke about. And those metrics, of which the main four, the 2 throughput and the 2 stability metrics, so our lead time, which we'll talk about more later, and our deployment frequency on the throughput side, and then the stability side, our MTTR and our change fail rate, are kind of important. And that's what we're looking at when we're looking at these capabilities in terms of moving forward. Now, many of you will have read, I hope, Accelerate, and keep your hands up and down, I think, today. Who's read Accelerate? Again, quite a few of you. We'll talk probably about quite a few of the IT Revolution press books today. That one's a really key one in my mind, and really helps us understand the correlations between these metrics and these practices and how they work together. But they're not the whole story for me, and I will talk about why that is as well. So where are we at with DevOps? Well, we're at this place where we're 15 plus years in. People are seeing some benefits, but it hasn't maybe delivered on its promise everywhere yet. One of the other beautiful things in this report is Patrick actually came out and said that he'd finally come up with a definition, something that had frustrated some people in the DevOps industry for some time, that we didn't really have a clear definition what DevOps was, and you could walk around a single organisation and get different people saying it was different things. I used to have a chart or a slide, I haven't used it for a while, it's not in this deck, but it was like a pair of scales, and on one side there was a cage, and on one side there was a bird flying free. And it was always intentional from people like Patrick not to have a manifesto or a definition around DevOps, because they wanted to not cage it. They wanted to give it that freedom to evolve, which it has done over time. But Patrick did put a stake in the ground in 2021, and he said that DevOps is whatever you do to bridge this friction, which is caused by these silos that we've created in our organizations. And those silos came about because of the evolution of tech in our organizations. I worked with Lloyds Banking Group. I mentioned they're over 250 years old. Tech is a really new concept in their organization, like 40, 50 years old. When they first got it, it was very back office, and it was like, it became bigger, and the finance teams and the people running the organization needed to find a way to control the costs. So they created departments, and that's where these silos came from. Now we live in the digital era and the digital economy, and actually our strategic enabler is what we do in technology, so those silos are quite problematic. And this is part of why DevOps is helping us and why VSM is experiencing this renaissance. So, following on this theme of where we're at, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to get involved with a group of people co-authoring this book called Investments Unlimited. I mentioned IT Revolution Press. This is another of their titles. I'm sure many of you have read the Phoenix Project as well. Of course, it's our Bible in DevOps, which was written by Gene Kim and et al. And Gene Kim obviously owns IT Revolution, the press behind all these wonderful books. I also mentioned From Project to Product, another one. So there's lots. We've got Steve in the front row here that will be chatting later about his new book, Flow Engineering, which is another one as well, so there's a lot out there. Anyway, Investments Unlimited is in the vein of the Phoenix Project. It's a novel, and it's a novel about IT governance, which I know can be not the most exciting of topics, but we've made our best effort to bring it to life. And, you know, as the guys just mentioned, Mark and Peter just mentioned, security and compliance are incredibly important for what we do in tech. So Investments Unlimited is an attempt or an effort to shine some light on that. One of my favourite scenes that I didn't write, I should probably hasten to add, I'm not even sure which of the authors wrote it, but there's a scene where our main character, Beal, walks past a room and he sees his CEO or his chair there in with Jason Colbert, who's this SVP of digital transformation, and on the screen he sees a slide and it says, "DevOps has failed you." And it's quite a significant, pivotal moment in the book where they kind of realise that they've made all this investment in DevOps with all these great hopes and dreams, and actually it hasn't quite done what it's done. But the point that Jason makes is it wasn't actually DevOps that has failed them, it's their implementation, and that they haven't done some of the cultural things that they needed to do, and they haven't paid attention to the details and the collaboration and some of the automation. So the rest of the book really is a journey on the way back to DevOps' true calling. So that's kind of can be a bit of a sentiment, I mean, a bit of a painful poll to try, but does anyone in the audience feel that DevOps is not maybe failing you, but DevOps has still got some way to live up to its promise? Hands up if we've got a way to go. So a few of you saying that. Anyone feel that they've done everything that they want to do with DevOps? I can't imagine why you would be in this room if that would be the case. So we've all got work to do, right? So this is kind of my first bit of my story, is this kind of like acknowledgement that perhaps we've got some things to do. And I'm not alone, you know, that's Patrick that said it, it's my other authors of the book, and now here's an industry analyst weighing in as well. So this is Gartner in their Predicts 2021, which was actually published at the end of 2020, saying that to reach this next level that we're talking about, this next level of capabilities, our INOs, that's our infrastructure and operations leaders in Gartner speak, must focus on value stream management to maximise flow, which we all know about, it's the first of the three ways, right? Improve delivery, efficiency, and drive innovation. So Gartner also thinking the same thing. Now, Gartner were kind of responding a little bit in this to something Forrester did. And we could point to Forrester, actually, for starting this renaissance. Renaissance, the word, means rebirth. You probably know that. So there's a big, I studied English literature at university. We had a renaissance in literature in the 1600s where people like Shakespeare started to retell a lot of the classical stories from the golden age of Greece. So when we're having a renaissance, we're kind of coming around again and revisiting something. So what Forrester recognised is there was something that was triggering this interest in value stream management. And we'll come back to the history of value stream management in a bit. But what Forrester did actually in 2017 is they published their first wave around value stream management. And then they did another one in 2020. And this is the quote is from the 2021. And it's saying here that when they published that first report, very few of the application development and delivery, AD&D and Gartner speak, leaders had heard of VSM. But since then, this market has evolved rapidly. Now, as somebody leading the Value Stream Management Consortium and heavily involved in the annual research that we've done, we're just on the cusp of delivering our 4th annual State of VSM report. I think this was a little preemptive. We have quite a few conversations at the consortium about where we are in terms of the technology adoption curve, if we're crossing the chasm, if we've crossed the chasm, if we're in the early majority, those kind of conversations. And I'll touch back on that later on as well. But Forrester recognised that there was a link between what was happening in VSM tools and DevOps tools that was driving this behaviour that was making us look closer at value streams. Now, when I was doing all of that work with all these companies around the world, those engagements looked like multi-year engagements where I would spend a few days a month on site with different teams. So with Lloyds Banking Group, for example, every year for several years, I would go around and I would meet with all of the teams and we would discuss where they were at and we would plot them on the assessment and plot their capabilities and see where they were improving. We try and dig out the stories about who was doing really amazing things and share them across the organisation, so making local discoveries, global improvements, and do all of that. But as well as the assessments, I had another load of tools in my kit bag. Some of it was the kind of classroom training from the DevOps Institute. Some of it was more interesting experiential learning, like we had a Phoenix Project game from the Dutch outfit Gaming Works, and various other components that we would package up. And one of these things was value stream mapping. And the very first value stream mapping exercise I did was with a company called Vocalink, who was subsequently bought by Barclaycard. And what we mapped was a project where they separated their retail and investment banking parts of the BACS payments within HSBC Bank. And they recognised that this project they'd done with HSBC, they were going to need to do it again with all of their banking customers. So they mapped the value stream of that project to understand how it had gone, how they could productise it, and how they could improve it as they went forward. This was before the DevOps Handbook came out, but when the DevOps Handbook came out, again, from IT Revolution Press, one of the things I was kind of relieved and kind of felt validated by was the inclusion of value stream terminology within it, specifically within these 2 chapters about selecting which value stream to work with and then understanding the work in that value stream and making it visible. So I was like, great, I'm not the only one that thinks this value stream management work should be included in what we do in DevOps. And it kind of makes sense. So Jane Grohl, who is the CEO of DevOps Institute, she used to describe DevOps as the harmonious, polygamous marriage between lean, agile, and ITSM. So, of course, value streams are lean, so this makes sense. It's part of DevOps. But it kind of brought it to the fore. But this history of value stream management is kind of interesting because it's been here before. In fact, we can trace the history of materials and information mapping and these ideas of looking at flow quite a way back. I often talk about the Venetian arsenal as one of the first places where people tried to map this flow. But most commonly, we know about Ford and, of course, Toyota in Japan in the 1950s is where a lot of this comes from. So we've kind of come round again. So sometimes value stream management in the market in recent days or weeks or months, I've seen it have criticism levelled at it that it's a shiny new thing. And it's really not a shiny new thing. We've known about value streams for a long time. We've learned a lot about how to map them. We've still got quite a lot of things to learn, of course. This is true in all of things in life. But it's coming round again. We know a little bit about why, but let's dig a little bit deeper as to why it's happening and how you can combine these 2 disciplines, always working. Well, first of all, here's a little snippet from Telstra. So Telstra are one of our VSMC members, Value Stream Management Consortium members. All of the case stories I'm putting in here today, by the way, are available on the Value Stream Management Consortium website, and you can view the talks in the members portal as well. So Telstra quite simply is saying that this is the next step for them. So they've kind of done that agile transformation and they've got as far as they've gone with that. And they've seen that actually value stream management is the next thing to evolve them to the next goals that they've got and get to the outcomes that they want to see next. So this is very recent, but my personal Bible for value stream management is this book from a guy called James Martin, who in 1995 published this book called The Great Transition. So my next question is, who's heard of James Martin before I put this up? I know you have. So I've been studying this book for quite a while with customers and in the context of the Value Stream Management Consortium. And writing this presentation, I went back to it again because I did one of those things where I asked Gemini to remind me what the Great Transition said about value streams, and it told me it didn't talk about value streams. So I moved house recently, and a lot of my books are in a box in the garage, so I had to go out into the garage and find my book, and I brought it back in. I had to, obviously, I'm sure you've all had this experience where you've had to nicely explain to Gemini that it's not quite right yet. So this is one of these instances. Because the whole of part 2 of the Great Transition is about value streams and actually the reinvention. Now, James Martin, for some reason, I hadn't learned that much about him until I picked up his book again recently, and then I started to dig around. And he was born in the 1950s in the UK. He was British. He went to work for IBM. He was from a working class background, but he got into a grammar school. He was quite a smart cookie, quite introverted, but became quite a good speaker, an absolutely prolific writer. He wrote something like 120 books. He managed to agree some kind of unusual royalty arrangement with IBM, which basically meant that he became a billionaire through the books that he wrote and the speaking that he did. And he bought an island off Bermuda where, unfortunately, in 2013, he passed away in a kayaking accident. But, you know, he had a pretty good life as things go. He was also incredibly philanthropic, and there's lots of things at Oxford University where he studied and things that he's invested in. But this book, for me, obviously, I've not claimed to have read, let alone heard of all of this, like 120 books. But The Great Transition, for me, was really very interesting. Now, I want you to think for a moment about where you were in 1995. I was just finishing my degree in English Literature and Language at London University and wondering what to do with it. And I spent a lot of time temping at university. I knew I didn't want to be a journalist. I wasn't ready to write novels. So I kind of let the wind blow me wherever it blew me to IBM. And that's where I was. And it was just the start of the internet. I'd done a module on my English degree on English and computing, and learned about HTML and the internet. And I remember sitting in, it was actually the Lotus department that I was in at IBM, and we would, at the end of the day, use the Netscape browser and see what we could find on the internet, which was almost always NASA, and that was about it in 1995. But in this book, James predicts the digital transformation that we've been living through now for several decades. And the biggest point he makes is that to make it effective, we need value stream management. But somehow this message got lost in the annals of time until about now. Sorry, the formatting of the slide's gone a little wonky. But let's just do a little bit of value stream management 101. Let's talk about what a value stream is, for starters. So I like to say a value stream is anything that delivers a product or a service, but you can get a bit more detail from James here. So we need a starting point. So we need an idea where it starts, and it finishes with the customer. And if you're beginning with the end in mind, you probably want to start with thinking about that customer and that outcome. But it's an end-to-end thing. It's a collection of steps or processes. And what we care about is the value that's moving through it. So what are we trying to create? So my next question for you is, who in the audience has ever mapped a value stream? I've spoken a little bit about, so quite a few of you have done it so far, so that's good. So mapping a value stream is the entry point into value stream management. But I want to emphasize that there is a difference between the practice of mapping and the practices of management as described by James Martin and also in other books named Value Stream Management from multiple authors. So when we map a value stream, what we're doing is something that's very human-oriented. Pre-pandemic, it was almost always in a physical space, and we would get together for a day, up to 4 days, depending on how much we could get signed off with a client, or people could spend on it internally, and we would put post-its on walls, and we would spend a lot of time visually collaborating on what these different steps were in our value stream and how long they took and how long we had to wait between them and which ones added value. And we'd get some really amazing insights into what was happening. And I always had fantastic feedback on the value stream mapping exercises, and we would have like clinics in companies where they would leave the value stream map up on the wall and they'd invite people to come and look at it, and it would become part of the socialization of their change strategy. It was quite a big thing. People people would feel really bonded. They would learn so much about each other. Because often when you map a value stream, it's people from different teams. Remember those silos? So people may have never been in that room together before. But the problem was that people didn't go back to their value stream maps. So what I mean is, when you do a value stream mapping exercise, you generally do, this is what our value stream looks like now, and then this is what our value stream will look like in the future. And that future value stream map is an amazing DevOps teaching exercise, because you start having conversations like, is this change approval or advisory board actually adding any value to the outcome to the customer, or is it just slowing us down? 9 times out of 10, probably 9 times out of 100, maybe even 909 times out of 1,000, the cab isn't really doing a lot of any use for anybody. So we try and find other ways, like automating the assurances that we're doing what we want to do, doing peer review, those kind of things, lightweight changes. So that's like one example of where we apply a DevOps fix, if you like, to a value stream problem. Another classic one is security. So we suddenly discover that we have a 6-week wait on security to get a sign-off on what we need to do. So we start talking about DevSecOps and how to perhaps automate using things like pre-blessed security libraries, or perhaps following the 80-20 rule and getting some security knowledge into that team. But the problem with value stream mapping, I found, is that we'd create these future state value streams, and then I'd go away to go and see my other clients and come back and see how people were doing, and nothing would have happened. They'd gone back to the desks and it was BAU. So this is kind of frustrating. But value stream management, as I'm going to show you, takes us to a different place, because it means we don't have to get all those people in a room, like once every 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is, to do this work. It becomes a constant way of living. And the tools that we've created, because of what we've been doing in DevOps for the last 15 years, enable us to continually inspect and adapt. So the value stream mapping, very valuable, very qualitative. So humans telling each other stories. Spookily correct quite a lot of the time. So as I said, what we do when we do a value stream map is we map the steps on the wall, and then we say how long each step takes, and then we add them all up. And people would do that, and then people go, it's 18 months. Oh, and the project was 18 months, so it's absolutely correct. So you like reverse engineer, if you like, the time that you spent on a project. So it's uncannily accurate, but it is out of human heads. But now we've got DevOps Toolchains. We've got it built into our systems. We just need to learn to get it out of there. So just a bit more on the principle of thinking like value streams. What we're trying to do is identify the gaps, the lengthy waits between things, the bottlenecks, the delays, the handoffs, where things go wrong and we have to go around the cycle again to correct it. And what we're trying to do is reduce the processes that take too long, and we're trying to eliminate processes that don't add any value. And so what you're seeing here is before, we have a total waste time of half the value stream, which is not an unusual amount of time to find waste in value stream. But after that, after we make our improvements, we gain all that time back. One of the classic things to avoid when we're doing value stream analysis is to not immediately think that it's like a productivity improvement or it's a cost saving. You can't just suddenly get rid of a bunch of people because you've shortened a value stream. The way to look at it is that in technology, we're strategic enablers. What you've just done is injected capacity into your value stream and gained huge competitive advantage. You're now in a position where you've got the time to deliver differentiating features and outstrip your competition. As I said, value stream management and value streams, not a new thing. They came from manufacturing in the 1950s. So, 75 years old plus now in just the Toyota timeline. But digital value streams are relatively new, as we said, and they are different. So the analogy that I like to use here is a Heinz tomato ketchup. So when we're creating something like a physical product like that, we spend quite a lot of time designing and developing and testing it before we've got our finished product. And then we mass manufacture it in like millions, billions of units and distribute it around the world. But in digital, it's a bit different because we've got our long-lived products, and particularly the more agile we are and the smaller batches we're working in, we're designing and developing a new thing every time. Every time we do something, it's something different. But we are delivering it through the same value stream over and over. So in digital, we spend much more time on that design and development because it's just that one thing, and less time in production because we're only delivering it once. And actually, if we've done our DevOps toolchain right, we should have cut that lead time in the DORA world down by a considerable amount. So, another thought, this time from Shutterstock, again, all these case stories available on the VSMC website. This is a shift, and actually it is probably a good time to talk about lead time and cycle time. So lead time in the DORA metrics is measured from code commit to production, as you probably know. And if you read Accelerate, the book about the DORA metrics, which I mentioned, it will explain to you why they started at code commit, because it's really difficult in the traditional digital delivery world to go earlier, because that's what we call the fuzzy front end. It's often outside of the technology teams, and DevOps has been stuck in technology teams for quite a while. But there is a shift when we move from traditional DevOps to value stream DevOps, really, if you want to describe it that way, which is in value stream orientation, it's that end-to-end. So we're starting with the idea. So we very much do care about the fuzzy front end. We very much do care about what happens before it hits our sprint backlog. And what Sejal, the CTO and CPO of Shutterstock, is saying here is that this mindset to move from that idea that we're just involved with like delivering software to the actually we care about the whole life cycle, the whole end-to-end value stream is quite a difficult change. So we have this one productivity metric that I touched on. We've got this BAU problem that I've touched on, and we've got tooling complexity that we'll come to. So lots of insights from Sejal here about having this clear VSM strategy. And one of the points she makes is about starting small and scaling. So at the Value Stream Management Consortium, we've come up with this implementation roadmap to help people guide themselves if they don't know what to do and where to start with value stream management implementations. First thing I want you to know on there is that map is one step. As I said earlier, mapping is not management, whilst it's very well known mapping, and most people's entry point to value stream management, it is actually only one component part. But before that, you can start wherever you are. You need to potentially assess what capabilities you've got and then set a vision. And then the next step is about identifying. And this is, I wanted to draw this back to Sejal's point, which is, where do you start? Do you try and start implementing value stream management across your whole organization, very big bang, painful transformation, or do you start with a pilot or two? Well, she says start small and scale, and any of you that are practicing in Agile and DevOps, I imagine, are starting small and scaling as well. So the wisdom there would be to identify one or two value streams and experiment first. And this is followed through with Dennis. That's, his nickname, Dionysus Vronos, who's one of our board members at the VSMC. He's joined us since joining us as a member. He's joined us on the board, and he is actually a project manager. Well, actually, he's a release train engineer, but he leads the Centre of Excellence for Project Management at Deutsche Telekom. And they did this, they tried it with two value streams, which was excellent because they could compare and contrast their learnings across two. So that was their first step towards it. So what he's saying, it is an organisational tool, but it's also a reflective methodology for individual growth. And I think this is a really important point he makes, that there are many different levels that value stream management works at. So it can work to help an individual develop their career, it can help a team develop and improve their product, and it can help an organisation understand what their whole value stream network looks like, which we'll keep talking about value stream networks, where their dependencies are, where their risks are, where they need to be compliant. So, at the VSMC, we say there are two elements to value stream management. There is the flow element, which is how fast or how efficient we are in delivering the value to our client. And then there is the effectiveness part, so how relevant it is that we've delivered, so what the outcomes are in terms of customer experience. And both those things are equally important in our mind, although a lot of value stream work has tended to focus on the flow, and realisation still needs some more effort. As Phil, also a board member now at the VSMC, says that context matters. Now, he makes this point about the differences between businesses and team focus. And this is a little bit painful for a lot of us in VSM, because we have lived through several decades where we've said things like, oh, let's align IT with the business. Oh, let's integrate IT with the business. Oh, IT is the business. But the bold truth is, in most organisations, there's still quite a lot of separation between the technology teams and the business teams, and that's still causing loads of friction. Remember what Patrick said earlier about the silos. But value streams and value stream management give us an opportunity to kind of ignore those barriers and say, well, this is the flow from the idea to the customer, and it doesn't care whether you sit in that business team or that technology team, because we're all the value stream team. So this is what a value cycle looks like. So that comment I made about the DORA metric of lead time being from code commit to production, what we're seeing here is we're starting a lot earlier than code commit again. So this is when I think about cycle time. Now, this gets really complicated in our industry because we've got lots of different practitioners that have learned lots of different things. And we did some micro-research at the VSMC, and we learned that there is a lot of variation in people's definitions of lead time and cycle time. So I tend to, when I've got my VSMC hat on, when I say lead time, I mean the DORA metric, and when I say cycle time, I mean from idea to value realization. So here we're concerned with that full cycle time. So we're going to start with our portfolio and backlog, so where we're storing and developing and refining our ideas. Then we're moving on to building, so code composition, actual coding, if we're still doing that, artifact incorporation, we're controlling our versions, we're doing automated build, we're using trunk-based development, all the things that we've learned from DevOps. Part of that, of course, is our continuous testing as well. And then we're into our continuous delivery. And then we're not done because we haven't actually realized the value yet. So now we are observing our product or service and learning more from it. And this is now a cycle. So if you've done a value stream map, you'll know that the human brain can only really cope with it being very linear, very A to B. But actually, when we're doing this, we're going round and round in cycles, adding improvements, changes, fixes each time we go around the cycle. So that's our cycle. Let's have a look at where DevOps Toolchain sits on this. So this is a simplified but still quite complex DevOps toolchain. So we're going to start with our our portfolio management tool, in this case Jira Align, then our product backlog tool. So we've got a Jira here, and then we've got a collaborative wiki, so we've got Confluence, then we've got our artifact repository here, we've got JFrog. Now, in my experience, in organizations that I've worked with, there are a lot of different tool chains. We talk about heterogeneous tool chains. I've done tool chain reviews across organizations and mapped every tool chain across different teams. I've helped people move towards platform engineering, where the platform has been a standardized DevOps tool chain, and we've worked out how to put exceptions into that tool chain. So this is just an example, but what I'm showing you is how we are building a DevOps tool chain around a value stream cycle. And we've got some Bitbucket there for version control. We've got our CI server. We've got some unit testing. Now, we've got a few sponsors here today, and I've given you an example of one, where we do have a lot of point solutions from one vendor that sit in multiple points of the DevOps toolchain. And actually, if you look at Gartner's research on value stream management, you'll see that they talk about value stream management delivery platforms. And they're talking about these ones where you get a lot of the components from one vendor. But there's always things like testing, and you've got different teams using different languages, like, you've got NUnit there, so you could have JUnit there, you could have different testing tool depending on what language you're testing in. It's a very difficult tool to standardize on. Then we've got Jasmine for integration testing, Selenium for user acceptance, so we're moving into our non-functional testing. Here, the example Sonatype. We've got Ansible here for environment release automation. We've got a service desk, and here we've got ServiceNow. Splunk for logging and monitoring. And what Netflix is saying here, which is leading up to my next point, is that when Netflix are doing or thinking about their value streams, they actually use their value stream understanding to help them prioritize their work. So they're focusing on which ones are most critical for the strategic bets that they've set as the highest priority. And they really understand this value realization that I was talking about. So they're looking at metrics like how many programs do they start watching, how long do they start watching a particular program. And this speaks to one of the challenges that we have with value realization, in that the definition of value is really hard to pin down. And a lot of people say things like the value is in the eye of the beholder, the value is unique to an organization, and in many cases it is. When we're working with digital products, there are some shortcuts, so things like customer journey time, customer basket size, form conversion. There's actually quite a few digital metrics that could be common across different digital products that we could use to understand the value realization. But the point I'm trying to make is that this part of our value cycle, or our DevOps toolchain, where we're doing things like logging, observability, AI ops, analytics, and dashboards with things like Moogsoft and Grafana, in my examples here, are really important for us getting that feedback. Remember, the second way of DevOps, and feeding that back into our portfolio and our product backlog, and deciding what we're going to do next and where we're going to place our bets. So, Unum, Took us all the way here last year in Flowtopia to the VSMP, the Value Stream Management Platform. So you've got that tool chain, you've invested in all of those bits, you may even have spent some time integrating various parts of it, you may have put a skin of a dashboard over at the top of it. I don't know if you've got that far, but we have these value stream management platforms that effectively kind of like give you an umbrella over it. So the way that UNIM is explaining it is they're saying that their DevOps Centre of Excellence is able to connect many of the core engineering tools. This is a big job. You've got all these tools. The question is, can you see the flow around the value stream? Or is it like stutter between tool to tool? With the connections, you can create these dashboards. And this means that our teams can now do value stream inspection whenever they want, effectively continuously. So we're now no longer in that place where a value stream map is a thing that requires a bunch of people to come in a room and spend a day together to understand it. We've now set it up that our DevOps toolchain is feeding us the information we need to understand our value stream. So these value stream management platforms give us this global optimization that we're looking for. So they connect our business and our technology teams. They connect our planning to our delivery that we've described. They give us visibility cross value stream, which I'll go into a bit more. We can see the user stories as they move the whole way around. They help with continuous compliance. We'll talk about dependencies in a second. Trying to avoid saying AI because I think we're suffering from AI crowd out, but AI is really useful to give us insights into it as well. And we've got inspection. So in this case, what we've got in DevOps is a massive toolkit of interventions. So we combine our analysis of the value stream in an organisation to help us understand where we've got a problem, and then we find the relevant DevOps intervention to make our improvement. So simple. Sorry, did you want a picture of that one? Sounds really simple, but as I said, in my experience, most organisations have a bunch of different value streams. So we've got a couple of value streams here. You can see there's a subtle difference in there. No prizes for spotting it. Sorry, I should have probably got a prize for that. But yeah, but it gets more complicated, doesn't it? Because organisations are large and they have lots of tool chains. And even that probably isn't that realistic for most organisations that have probably maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of different variations of tool chains across their teams. So this is a complicated business. These tool chains hold all this information. So each team now can be working on their value stream, improving each value stream, improving the speed at which they're delivering change to their client, and hopefully making sure the change that they deliver is what their client or their user base really wants. But at an organisational level, we now have an opportunity to see our organisation, our company, as a set of value streams, as represented by DevOps Toolchains here. And what that means is we can start doing things like dependency analysis. So this, again, is hugely simplified. I mean, imagine all these connections going across it in the tools. What we can start doing at the most basic levels, and you might remember earlier I said that my DevOps career started with release management. Release management is one of those really dangerous moments, and actually it feels like it's got even more dangerous in the microservices world, because quite often we're crossing over into microservices from multiple teams and we don't necessarily realise, and we push change and it breaks a bunch of things and we didn't really realise that we were all using that thing. So release management is a great use case for value stream management at an organisational level, understanding the value stream network, understanding where we've got common dependencies. But continuous compliance is another one. So I've seen, I haven't got the case story in here, but there's a company in New York called Health First. Tony Mongiovi did a case story there with a company called Plutora, if you want to look it up. And they actually used their value stream management system to help them improve their DevOps tool chains. So they were able to see team by team who was getting the most successful releases, what their DevOps tool chain looked like in that team, and able to kind of change the rules of what people could do depending on what their capabilities were. So just to finish up, if you remember from the talk flow map at the start, I said it's like, well, what do you do now? Well, here's just a little tool that you might want to use, which is just a capability matrix, which is just a thing that you could reflect on with your team or your peers in your organisation, and just have a think about kind of where you are with these different dimensions that I've created on the VSM matrix. The slides, I believe, will be made available to you to download. You can find the VSMC, I'm sure, very easily. You can find me on LinkedIn. So if you want any additional help, please just reach out and ask. I'm here all day also. I'm very happy to talk about value stream management, and very happy indeed to have had this time with you today. And that's just a token because I thought he was cute and colourful. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.